Hi, I just recorded 5 minutes without the video, so I'm gonna go back. Hi, my name is Nancy Leibach Mann. It's being recorded now. And I'd like to talk to you about my experiences going through my PhD training through the University of Arizona. My studies are in biliteracy, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. A lot of people misunderstand when you're talking about bilingualism. They assume it's American Sign Language and English, but really bilingualism can include any two languages, Spanish, French. The point is that you're studying two languages, how people can learn two languages simultaneously. And boy, did we have some vigorous debates in my class and lots of differing perspectives. And really, the important take home is that learning two languages is best done with a child at a young age and not an adult. There's a concept of motherese, which is like the bond that a mother has with their child. And that happens in all languages and all societies. And throughout the world, there's this concept where there's a special bond. But I'd like to speak today about what happens with deaf children and biliteracy. So the concept is that you have two languages, American Sign Language and English. And with biliteracy, it doesn't mean that it's limited to just reading and writing English. If the child can and has a propensity for spoken language, then there would also be spoken English involved. The point is that you meet the child where they are at, and that each child gets the opportunity to use American Sign Language and read and write English. So when you talk about the idea of bilingual education, many schools will misunderstand and think that you're talking about simultaneous communication, SIMCOM. And now SIMCOM is actually a mode of communication. It's not a language. It's actually fragmented languages, fragmented thoughts. I would love to meet somebody who is fluent in SIMCOM. It's pretty difficult to do. Usually you're dropping the second language, and oftentimes English is one that maintains the priority. The grammatical structures of ASL and English are different. And so usually somebody starts off with the concept, but the problem is English is one of the most complicated languages in the world. And so when you think about using a complicated language like English with American Sign Language, that's pretty difficult to master. And when you think about also the children are learning it, but also family members who are older learning it later in life, it's very difficult. But the important thing is that you get the child as early as you can and teach them both languages. And using the languages separately, English and sign language in separate forms. So let's get rid of the concept of simultaneous communication, which does not really work. It's important to have a language plan. You need a team that develops a language plan. It's a big responsibility to have the teachers, the parents involved, and you need to set some basic ground rules, like when it's recess time out on the playground, lunchtime. You need to set up rules for when the kids can sign, when they're going to be using English. Obviously, the deaf children will be signing, but Also, you can have, as a way to enforce English, like with the lunchtime, you can have signs in written English. You can have social media, Facebook, Twitter, really capitalize on the importance of that in young people's lives, have captioning on the TV. You always want to reinforce the relationship between both languages, American Sign Language and English. One of my favorite stories is, as a teacher, I was working with a classroom and talking about different issues, and I've done some research focusing on captioning and on school-age children and the impact that that might have on vocabulary development. And so I did a pre and a post test. And I took a TV show, a 30-minute show, and I did it 5th or 6th grade reading level, chose the vocabulary words, and in the pre-test I had a list of 10 words, and I didn't say what they meant. I just listed the words and had the children fill out the sheet, and then they watched the show, and then they had a post-test. And sure enough, they figured out what the words meant in context of the show. Then I would interview the children afterwards, after each vignette, and we'd have a discussion. And before the interview, I'd ask them, what do you think of the story? Or, what words were challenging for you? And we discussed that as a group. And one student, I remember, she raised her hand and said, I don't understand this word, backstabbing. And I was kind of surprised because that was a 7th grade class I was teaching. I've seen them use that sign, the sign that one associates with backstabbing, many times. So I wrote out the word on the board and I said, okay, so let's talk about that. What's the sign for this word? And the children didn't know. And so I kept trying to draw it out of them, and nobody knew the answer. So I showed them the sign. And they saw the sign, and they were dumbfounded because each of them had used that sign. They had seen the sign many a time. It's a middle school, come on. Backstabbing, with all the, the things that happen in the classroom. Of course they're going to come up with that sign, but it was interesting to me that so just the idea of throwing out a sign and asking. So I thought this is a great way to develop vocabulary. Just throw out signs and what's the English word for that? And that's a way to make it fun and make them really understand how vocabulary development is a good thing in their life, and the exposure is important as well. I missed something. And so in typical classrooms across America, students learn English, but where is academic American Sign Language classes for deaf people? And so that's a really important thing too for bilingual education. They need exposure to scholarly American Sign Language studies. Oh, do you have a question?
In the classroom, you teach 50% English and 50% ASL. How does that work?
Okay, so yes, I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So we have a language plan, as I said before, and there's an actual timetable for this and for that. And, unfortunately, many deaf kids arrive to the school with a pretty dismal signing ability, and English too, for that matter. And so we really have to catch them up, and we do that socially. That's where we focus as, young kids. We work on the socialization, and then little by little we teach reading and writing and English. And before you know it, there's some fluency. But in kindergarten, we're really heavily focused on socialization, and so the using American Sign Language and at that level is a lot higher than English. And then as the child progresses throughout the schooling, uh, that uh, that changes, and so there's more emphasis on English and less because they're using American Sign Language outside the classroom. But the idea is that we develop this fluency so that they can switch back and forth between the two languages. And children know when they're in the classroom, you're starting out teaching things in American Sign Language, and they're getting exposure to words. And like in the academic ASL class, they might come across the idea of classifiers, and they love to play this game, like using hand shapes. Like, okay, come on, what kind of hand shapes, can you think of with an A hand shape? And we come up with a list of vocabulary, and I write out the English word on the blackboard. So that way we're reinforcing both American Sign Language and English. They're getting exposure to both languages. So it might start out 80% American Sign Language, 20% English. By the time they're in middle school, 50-50. As they get older, it might be a different proportion, more strongly weighted towards English. But I'd like to emphasize that the English is always in the classroom. We're always emphasizing the integration of both languages. For the students who have spoken language ability, we encourage them to develop those skills. They go to audiology, and there's work in the classroom there. They're using spoken English and American Sign Language. Some teachers became upset when we started talking about letting that happen, and teachers and we're like, no, you need to understand that if somebody has a propensity, and if their hearing parents want them to learn their language and they have the propensity, then we should allow that to we should allow them to succeed in that way. So those children will be going back and forth between spoken English and written English, but always with the underlying background of American Sign Language in the background. Like for storytelling and, teaching, that's happening in American Sign Language. And for the students who have the propensity, they're also learning how to do that in spoken English in a different environment. The important aspect is the language attitude, meaning that we each have respect for both languages equally at an early age. We don't want to reinforce the idea that one language is better than the other, or that certain students who have propensity for one language versus another are any better. We don't want to reinforce those negative stereotypes. So we highly encourage an attitude of respect for both languages and abilities.
How many hearing students are involved in that program? Do you currently have any hearing students?
No, we do not have any hearing students. However, at the Clare School in Tucson, a few years ago, Dr. Sam Sapala and his team set up a school for both deaf and hearing students, and my son was there for 2 years. It was a wonderful, wonderful environment. So the instruction was in American Sign Language, 100%. And after 2 years, I'm telling you, I could not tell the difference between the deaf and the hearing children. They were all signing like stars. One problem is some of the hearing students, when they got tired or they'd get lazy, they'd start talking, and they'd have to be reminded not to do that because it's obviously an American Sign Language environment. But other than that, you know, it was a successful program. Most of the hearing students there they had siblings that were deaf. Some of them were children of deaf parents. And some of the hearing students were just, their parents were, you know, were very fluent in other languages, and they thought it would be cool to have their children develop sign language skills. So there was a lot of research that took place there. But that was in Tucson, and you know, it was a basically a small town. There was a small population of deaf people, so you know, maybe if it happened, maybe if we had that same
In your
thing
opinion,
in another city, it might work.
what would be the ideal bilingual educational program for deaf children?
So let me think. The ideal situation, that's, boy, that would be good to have. Well, academic sign language, for sure. And I'd love to see that include hearing children who had signing, you know, who were fluent in the American Sign Language. You wouldn't want to lose the focus, you know, because obviously the importance of a school is the content. So, but it would be cool to have that American Sign Language be part of their everyday life in the school. And that would be a way to gain confidence and socialize. And Vygotsky and his work talked a lot about developing the socialization. Somebody's approach. So that students become responsible for their own learning. And become critical thinkers. So that concept pushed back into the school system and study. So less focus on studying and tests and more focus on critical thinking and giving back to society, basically. And that would be beautiful to have deaf and hearing students together in such a society in a bilingual environment. So that would be my ideal setting.
Do you have any advice for parents who just found out their child is deaf?
Okay, so if you just found out your child is deaf, I would say, first of all, they are your children. And there's no difference, really, between that child and another, except perhaps the mode of communication. You know, I would say ask around. Take an active approach. You know, learn both language, learn sign language. But do not dismiss, incorporate ASL into your life, because it will give you a rich experience by learning American Sign Language. It's a beautiful language.
I don't have a question, but I just want to sincerely thank you for the work that you do.
You're welcome. Oh, yay. All right, I missed some of that near the end.